could win the race because there are too many candidates, and that he'd like to see two people drop out and have it just be one. He didn't say which two candidates he would like to see drop out. The NFL kicked off last night. They kicked off their season. Cowboys had plenty of chances in the end.
Pressure at least showing it.
And they are bringing it. And Prescott's lofting it. CD couldn't bring that one in either.
Oh, CeeDee Lamb needed to make that catch. Diving catch. Could have been a first down. And who knows, maybe they could have won the game, but they lose it. Against the Eagles, 24-20. Jalen Hurts threw for 152 yards, ran for a pair of touchdowns in the victory. Week 1 continues tonight with the Chargers taking on the Chiefs in Brazil. Broncos kickoff Sunday, 2:05 at Mile High versus the Titans. 53 in Aurora, 52 in Littleton, 54 in Denver. Actually, I think it's in the low 60s now. Jeff and Billy continue. Blake Olson, News Talk, 710 KNUS.
Cooler temperatures, a smoky haze, cloudy skies, and there will be a few isolated showers and thunderstorms today. Highs only low 70s. Lows tonight will be cool down into the mid to upper 40s. Warming Saturday to the low 80s, partly cloudy, and a late-day isolated thunderstorm. Lower 80s with a better chance of thunderstorms Sunday. Weather is a service of L&L Heating and Air Conditioning. For quick, trustworthy, and dependable service, call L&L Heating and Air Conditioning at 720-851-1691. Visit them online at bestdenverhvac.com. You'll be comfortable with L&L. Meteorologist Don Day in the 710 KNUS Weather Center.
Well, this is a conversation you're not going to want to miss. This is going to be a fun one. Joining us live in studio is Chris deGruy Kennedy's the president of the Bell Policy Center. And they're floating the idea. I think you guys are out there getting ready to launch this, or at least maybe you're before the title board, but you want to put a question onto the 2026 ballot initiative, which would be to get rid of Colorado's flat tax and move to a graduated income tax. And currently in the state of Colorado, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, please, Chris, but we pay a 4.4% across the board flat tax on our income. You guys think that the rich aren't paying enough, and we need to move to a graduated income tax that would lower that percentage on some on the lower economic spectrum, and then raise it even up to 9%, I think, on some of the more wealthy folks, in an effort to get $2 billion into the coffers of the government to fund a myriad of different projects. Is that essentially what you guys are trying to do?
Yeah, that's right. So we're looking at doing what 27 other states in this country already do and change the tax rates based on your level of income. And just to make clear that this is not a radical or extreme idea, some of the other states that have a graduated income tax in this country include Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. This is an incredibly common practice across the country, but in Colorado it's not, because in 1987, the state legislature moved away from a graduated income tax towards a flat tax rate. And then when Tabor passed in 1992, it said all income shall be taxed at the same rate, whether that be individual versus corporate or different levels of income. Now, that income tax rate has also been permanently lowered 4 times since 1992, twice in the late 90s, and again with 2 propositions that were on the ballot in 2020 and 2022. So we now have the lowest income tax rate in state history, but the benefits of that predominantly go to the folks with the highest levels of income. And so what that has meant is in the last several years, it hasn't been as big of a problem because we've had $3 or $4 billion Tabor surpluses. So when we're giving back that money to taxpayers and their Tabor rebates anyway, just doing a tax cut just reduces the amount of Tabor refunds they get the next year. But now that we're in this era where, because of the federal policy that drove us down below the Tabor cap again, We are now in a place where those income tax cuts of the last couple of years are having an impact of hundreds of millions of dollars on our ability to fund our healthcare infrastructure, our K-12 education infrastructure, child care supports for families, and a number of things that people really value. So what our proposal would do was it would lower the rate from our current 4.4 to 4.2% on the first $100,000 of income and keep the tax rate the same on the next $400,000 of income. What that means is that anyone making less than $500,000 a year, and that's 98 or 99% of the state, will get a tax cut from this proposal. And it's only the top 1 or 2% that end up paying more to get us closer to how other states do tax policy, including those red states that I mentioned earlier.
That's Chris deGruy. Kennedy is the president of the Bell Policy Center. Now, Chris, I've heard from Jared Polis even that they want to get rid of the income tax entirely. Aren't we taxing people and their success and their opportunities to invest back into the state? Aren't we taking that away from folks?
You know, the governor and I disagree about a great many things, and this is one of them. I think that you accurately described his position. He has spoken about income taxes as not wanting to disincentivize productivity. And I certainly understand that. But what I would also say is the kinds of budget cuts we're making to healthcare in light of the federal Medicaid cuts over the next few years, these are going to directly lead to the closures of rural hospitals and rural healthcare clinics. And so I know that there are a lot of different beliefs about the needs of the state government, and that's something we can definitely dive into this morning. But I want to be really clear that when we talk about increasing the tax rates on higher income, this is not about punishing wealth. It's about making sure those who have benefited the most from the economic growth of this state over the last several decades are paying their fair share so that we could have an education system, a healthcare system, a child care support system that makes sure that everyone's got a fair shot, that if they work hard enough, they actually have access to the American dream in this state.
Wouldn't the fair share be equal across all levels? I mean, that's what the flat tax does. 4.4% says you make this amount of money, you're going to pay 4.4%. That's a fair share no matter what level you're at, isn't it?
That's a commonly held belief, and I would look at it a little bit differently because the reality is the very wealthy pay a lower share of their income in taxes than everyone else. Now, this is when you look at the combination of income taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes, but the wealthiest 1% pay about a third less in their annual income in taxes than the middle class. And so I think that that's what's unfair about the system. And this is in part because when you talk about the very wealthy paying sales taxes and property taxes, that's just going to be a lower share of their income because they may be buying more than middle income people, but they're not buying so much more than middle income people that they end up paying that same share of sales tax. The other reason is that the very wealthy tend to benefit from more deductions, more loopholes, more tax shelters than everybody else. And they have big lawyers that help them do that. And so I'm not saying it's wrong. They're using the law as it is structured by the IRS and the state government for certain kinds of tax policies. And we've tried to close many of those loopholes in Colorado over the last decade. But what I would say is the wealthy are not, in fact, paying their fair share. And you can see this also in the concentration of income and wealth over the last however many years. You know how hard middle-income people work in Colorado. There are tons and tons of hardworking people that are busting their butts every day just to put food on the table and keep up with the high costs of housing and health care. Not to mention child care for those that have kids. It's crazy how much child care costs these days. But the challenge is their hard work is not being rewarded the way it should be because so much of their hard work leads to more income for the people at the very top. And that's what I think is unfair.
That's Chris deGruy Kennedy, the president of the Bell Policy Center. They're leading a ballot initiative to get rid of the flat tax that we have here in Colorado, move to a graduated income tax. Is it for individuals only? I think I've read in that Sun article that this would include businesses, and a business making $1 million is not a big business. That's maybe 5-10 employees. So are we now going to be increasing the tax on businesses as well?
Well, let me be clear that the way you define corporate income is the profit after they've paid out all their expenses. So that is not the case that we're talking about businesses with 5 to 10 employees. Right. So a couple of things about this. Yes, the ballot measure, as proposed, does include both individual and corporate income tax rates. 2, The bulk of small businesses are partnerships or pass-throughs, so they're not paying corporate income tax, period. They're taking their share of a salary that they draw from working for their small business, and they're paying taxes on that. So if the owners, let's say there's 4 owners of a business that's making $2 million a year, and they each take home $500,000, they are not going to pay more taxes on that. Now, when you talk about C Corps, these are the big corporations. I mean, there are some smaller C Corps as well. But the reality is, if you've got a C Corp that after paying out all your employee compensation, after you pay out all of your other expenses associated with doing your business, if you're making more than $500,000 a year in profit, that's when the new tax rate would kick in for corporations in Colorado.
And you think corporations here in Colorado will stick around?
That's not how corporate taxes work, Jeff.
Yeah. I mean, you don't think they're going to move out of the state if they're now all of a sudden having to pay a higher rate?
That's not how corporate taxes work. Corporate taxes are based on how much you sell in a state. So 91% of corporate taxes are paid by national companies, some of which are based in Colorado, that sell products across the country based on how much they sell here. And the other thing I would add about this is even with the rates we propose in this structure, we are still in the middle of the pack of other states. Like right now, we are very near the bottom in terms of low corporate income tax rates. Even with what we propose here, we won't be in the top half of states. And for small businesses, we'll be the 35th lowest in the country.
That's Chris deGruy Kennedy, president of the Bell Policy Center. We're talking about their ballot initiative effort to get rid of the flat tax. Now, the Bell Policy Center, well known for their efforts to try to get rid of Tabor. Is this just another effort to get rid of Tabor?
I think that misses the point. We do have criticisms of Tabor because we believe that what Tabor has done is locked in place an unfair and inadequate tax code. But the reality of this proposal is it strikes one sentence from Tabor alone. It strikes the sentence that says all income shall be taxed at the same rate. Otherwise, it leaves Tabor intact. Voters will still have the right to vote on their own taxes. Voters that are making less than $500,000 will still get the same Tabor refunds they would have gotten before.
Okay. For going back to the individuals, those making over $500,000, $1 million, aren't they going to leave the state?
There's a lot of evidence to the contrary. So yes, some will.
Yeah.
But the evidence in other states has shown that very few, in fact, leave the state. The most recent example, Massachusetts passed a millionaire's tax in 2022. And what they've actually seen in the few years since that's been in place is the number of millionaires in Massachusetts has grown and the total wealth of millionaires in that state has grown. And I think that just speaks to the way that our economy works right now, where the very wealthy end up taking the bulk of the money out of our economy. And so sure, I would expect there will be some small number of millionaires who decide to leave the state. It will not be enough to undermine what we're trying to do with the policy. And I think what I would really want to underscore is that all of the evidence shows that quality of life issues are the primary reason people move, regardless of their income level. Colorado's high quality of life, being close to the mountains, having clean air, this is one of the things that attracts people to the state. It's why our population has grown so much in this state. And so I think that there's really very little evidence there will be a mass exodus of millionaires from the state.
Okay. At the end of the day, this is about raising revenue for government, right? I mean, you guys want to get $2 billion into the government. I mean, you guys have raised revenue. You guys are, the state capital is doing, and you spent 8 years there as a state rep. You all are doing record spending compared to what was done before. Why does the state need more money?
So it's about two things, right? Yes, it is about more revenue for the state to spend on things like education, healthcare, and childcare, but it's also about a more fair tax system so that regular working folks get a little bit of a break while the wealthier pay their fair share. But to your key question about the needs of the state government, I want to debunk a couple things that have been said. I've heard it said that the state government has grown by 50% over the last 10 years. It's a common talking point I see on Twitter. That is misleading for a couple different reasons. One, inflation, just since COVID alone, has been through the roof. Now, let's not go down that rabbit hole of who's to blame for the inflation we experienced, but that's a reality. And if you think that the inflation on regular families' costs is real, look at the cost of the health care that we provide for the state workforce. Look at the costs of capital construction and highway construction projects. Those costs have gone up even more. Secondly, the state population has grown quite a bit over the last decade. So if you just look at inflation and population, you'll see that the state's general fund has stayed within the Tabor limit, right? Now, we can talk about cash funds, we could talk about federal funds, but the general fund, which is where the bulk of the money for K-12, Medicaid, childcare, well, not childcare, that's the tobacco money. I got led astray there, but let's just say education and healthcare for now. That comes from the general fund. Those dollars have not grown faster than inflation and population because they are not allowed to. By the Constitution, they have been restrained by those things. And so the other thing I would say is some of those numbers about a 50% growth double count dollars. So there's a category of funds in the state government called reappropriated funds. These are dollars that are sent to one department and then later get transferred from that department to another. A great example is if the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing needs legal services, they transfer some of their appropriated dollars over to the Attorney General's office for the legal work that they do. So those are called reappropriated funds, and you include those in the totals, that's double counting the money. I would also say some of the federal dollars end up getting double counted in that math. So the reality of how the state budget has grown is it has been right in step with inflation plus population. But when you compare it to the growth of the state's economy, the state budget has in fact shrunk over the last 33 years compared to the size of the economy.
So, but I mean, you use 50% as the model and saying we didn't hit 50%, but we have grown, and you're saying we're growing along with inflation and population, right? But you're making the argument we need $2 billion more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, and I'll say this for a few different reasons. So let's talk about healthcare first. All right. So the reason the costs of the Medicaid system are growing in Colorado is because of our aging population. And that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing that we've got an aging population. It's a beautiful thing to move past your working years into your retirement years and have the wisdom of generations before that you bring along. But the Medicaid costs associated with long-term care in particular, especially if you have severe health conditions or disabilities, that's why the Medicaid costs of the state are going up faster than they had been a decade prior.
Not illegal immigrants?
No, it's not illegal immigrants.
Okay.
We can talk about that, but let's finish this point,
okay,
and then we can come back and talk much more about how much immigrants pay in taxes in Colorado compared to how much they get back in government services, because I can make the case that immigrants put much more into the economy than they get back out. Now, to this point about Medicaid, we are not paying healthcare providers enough. We are paying them about 80 cents on the dollar for the level of healthcare they provide, so that when doctors and hospitals and clinics opt into the Medicaid program, they lose money on those patients. That ends up being a cost shift onto our health insurance premiums for the people that have traditional health insurance. So that's a problem that we've had for a very long time in this state. Now it's being exacerbated by the federal cuts that are happening. Now, the Medicaid work requirements are an interesting example, because what we are going to have to do to pay for the new bureaucracy and red tape to implement the work requirements is cut healthcare services. And the reality is that 92% of people on Medicaid are already working or qualify for either a disability or a student exemption. And so we're talking about a real meaningful cut to healthcare services in order to pay for new government and new bureaucracy to administer Medicaid work requirements. But that's the smaller of the two problems that's coming down the way with Medicaid. The bigger one is this provider fee limitation that the federal government put in place. What that's going to mean by 2032 is somewhere between $1 and $2 billion of lost revenue for the Medicaid program. This is a lifeline for rural Colorado, a lifeline for rural hospitals, a lifeline for rural clinics. If this goes away, there is no replacement for that money. So that's one reason we're talking about $2 billion in new tax revenue from the very wealthy in our proposal. I'm going to get a sip of water, and then I'll continue my thought here.
That's fine. You can see, talented lawmaker, 8 years down at the state capitol, being able to argue this stuff. We could get into illegal immigrants, because I think the best example of the idea that this just doesn't balance out is the city of Denver is run out of money. They served 40,000 illegal immigrants. And so if the idea that somehow they add to tax revenue that's going to offset the cost, they're $200 million in the hole.
I'm not an expert on city government.
I would.
I'm sorry.
But I just think the idea that somehow, and then our state is facing a budget crisis. So if they added all this tax revenue, I just don't see it play out.
Well, let me Let me say a few things. I can't say anything about the city of Denver. I've
Yeah.
never worked in city of Denver politics. I've gotten involved in Lakewood politics a little bit when I was representing that area in the legislature. But really what I'm talking about is the state government. So you can save the Denver
Right.
conversation for someone who's more expertise on that.
Okay.
What I can say is undocumented immigrants in Colorado pay $437 million a year in state and local taxes. I've attempted to estimate what that is for the state government alone, and I think it's at least $175 million a year in taxes. So when you talk about the health care that's being provided for undocumented families, let me just add up these dollars for you. We're spending about $90 million on the Omni Salute program, which is helping people that don't otherwise have access to health insurance through the exchange get access to health insurance through this special program. That was my bill. I wrote that bill, and I'm incredibly proud of that bill because these are families who are working hard and contributing to our economy as well. We can talk about whether it's fair or not that they came here without getting a visa. That's a different conversation, but they are working, they are paying taxes, and they're contributing to their communities here. And so helping them afford health insurance is a critical priority, $90 million. The other one that's known as, this is more plugged into Medicaid than private insurance, but this is the Caring for All Coloradans program. This is 20,000 people, of which 15,000 are kids. These are kids and pregnant women that are on this program. That's costing the state about $39 million a year. So I'm not saying that's a small number, but again, $90 million for Omni, $39 million for Caring for All Coloradans, and immigrants are paying in $175 million in state taxes every year. They are paying their own way.
Why are we in a budget crisis?
Why are we? What do you mean?
And we were in a budget crisis even before the big, beautiful bill passed. I mean, I was down there with the teachers that were protesting outside the state capitol to Jared Polis saying, don't cut our budget. That was before the big, beautiful bill.
I think
so. If illegal immigrants are bringing in money or all this stuff, why are we in a budget problem?
Because the Tabor cap does not correctly keep up with the true growth of the cost of just maintaining the exact same level of government services. And this is because inflation, as we measure in the Tabor formula, is based on the consumer price index. That's for things like toasters, for groceries, for regular items that regular people buy. The things that the government spends money on grow at a different rate. That's not good or bad. It's just real.
No, I think it's because the government spends money, isn't it?
I'm talking about per service. So we're not talking about the total amount of money here. What I'm talking about is what government spends money on is a lot of staff. We can talk about whether you like that or not, but the reality is helping staff afford health insurance when health costs are growing faster than anything else in our economy. That just grows every year. So just the health insurance costs alone. Why do I think health costs are growing?
Yeah.
Because I think that our market system in healthcare isn't working properly. I think what we're seeing right now is that there is a lot of incentive for big hospital systems to build out more facilities. They're all managed by mega national groups. Some of them are nonprofits, but these are large hospital systems that are competing with each other and building out new facilities. I'd also say the cost of prescription drugs are through the roof. I passed legislation in 2021 that put in place the first upper payment limits on prescription drugs of any state in the country to try to put a control on that, but it's a real challenge. And of course, there's going to be arguments that that creates economic disruptions that might be problematic.
But you don't think in any of your equations as to why healthcare is outspending everything else is because of government intervention into that?
Absolutely not.
No, I mean, but everywhere else that the government gets involved, whether it's education or healthcare, the costs outweigh traditional inflation in other areas.
I understand that you believe that.
Yeah, but you don't think the government has anything to do with that?
Listen, here's one thing I will acknowledge. Every system, whether a government system or a large corporate system, has a tendency to develop inefficiencies over time. And so will I say that there are no inefficiencies in state government? No, of course there are. Of course, there are things that need to be reprioritized. But here's an interesting point. It's often criticized that we pass something like 600 pieces of legislation every year in the state. What I wish people understood is that the vast majority of these are tweaks to previous year's legislation. We are constantly iterating and fixing and repairing things. We are looking for efficiencies. We are looking to reprioritize how we're spending money to make sure we're making things more efficient and focusing on the highest priorities every year. That's what most of the legislation is. So I'd say making government more efficient is a struggle, but it's a work in progress where we make progress every year.
That's Chris deGruy Kennedy. He's the president of the Bell Policy Center. They are beginning the effort to get a ballot initiative together that would end Colorado's flat tax, move to a graduated income tax. We're going to continue this conversation. Holy cow, the phone lines are hot. Text messages are hot. Chris, you got them going this morning. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
We'll continue the conversation. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's Talk Leader News Talk 710 KNUS.
You know that money that's in your wallet? Well, I think it could be better spent with the government. No, I don't actually think that. But we're having fun here with Chris deGruy Kennedy. He's the president of the Bell Policy Center. First of all, thank you for coming by.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We obviously disagree on this one. And I'm going to throw this question to you, and then we'll get to the calls. I'm a resident of Colorado. I'm a native of Colorado. I've looked at progressive domination of the political institutions of Colorado, and I look at the results, the fruit of it. Everything's more expensive. Our taxes are going up because of property taxes. It feels like I'm paying more than ever before, and it feels like the services aren't being delivered. My roads are terrible. My health insurance is more expensive. Everything is more expensive. So why, Mr. Kennedy, should the government get more money?
Well, thank you for the question, Jeff. I do acknowledge that cost of living is a huge challenge in this state. It's really expensive to get health care. It's really expensive to get child care. I think it's really expensive to get higher education. Housing is obviously really expensive. And a lot of these things have been big challenges that the state government has been working on trying to address over the number of years. What we're talking about in this proposal actually saves money for 98% of the people of the state. And let me just break down a few of the different ways that we're proposing to help make Colorado more affordable for regular working people. First of all, there's a direct tax cut in the measure. I know that doesn't always pass the smell test with people because they don't believe that a progressive or a Democrat would ever suggest that cutting taxes is a good thing. But what I would say is that is the unfairness of our current tax structure, where the wealthy are paying too little and regular working people could afford a little break to help them get by. So what we're proposing is a 0.2% tax cut for 98% of the state. And I just want to explain what exactly that looks like. There have been 2 tax cuts passed on the ballot in the last 2 years. What we're proposing is a bigger tax cut than 2022's Proposition 121 for anyone making less than $150,000 a year. And it's a bigger tax cut than 2020's Proposition 116 for anyone making less than $250,000 a year. So we are trying to give regular people a break while making the wealthier pay their fair share. Some of these other things you talked about with the costs, you may have a belief that is because of the way government has intervened, and you're certainly entitled to that perspective. But I would say that the costs of health insurance are driven up because of the healthcare market being a fundamentally broken market where costs go up and the insurance companies are not doing anything to control the costs. Insurance companies are just making more money the more money that goes into the system, and that system fundamentally needs reform. What that reform looks like, that's a debate for another day. Yeah. But childcare costs, the reality is we have to pay childcare workers too. The people that are caring for our kids at preschool all day, my daughter's going to be at a preschool all day with a classroom of, 10 or 12 kids. You need the people in that classroom with your kids to be qualified. In order to be qualified, you have to pay them enough to live in the communities where they teach. I think the teachers at my kids' preschool get $20 an hour. That's not enough to afford the cost of living in Lakewood. These are real challenges in our community. And so, yeah, there's work to be done on all of this stuff, but I would argue that the bigger problem is we have not invested enough in the key things that make economic opportunities real for people.
And I so appreciate you being here, brother. That's where you and I think, have our fundamental difference of opinion. Is I look at a state that's been dominated by Democrats, taking in record money into the state government, providing record government services and expenditures, and nothing is more affordable, nothing is a higher quality. And the argument, we just need a little bit more. If we just had a little bit more, we'll finally unleash this kind of paradise of government services. I just don't know. I just don't think it delivers. But that's where you and I disagree, and I sure appreciate you being here. You want to take some phone calls?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. Chris deGruy Kennedy, live in studio, president of the Bell Policy Center. Let's go to Jack in Wyoming. Good morning, Jack. You're on with Jeff and Bill.
Good morning.
And Chris.
Morning.
Good morning, guys. Perhaps one of the founding fathers said it best, that John Marshall, he was also a jurist on the federal bench. His statement was, the power to tax is the power to kill. Okay? Now, we can't do much on the federal tax. Let's not conflate that with state tax. But state taxes can do different things. Now, and income tax is not just payroll tax. It's also tax on investment portfolios. That's why I beat it up here to Wyoming. Now, I do have to pay on my investment portfolios, and I've got several large ones, federal taxes. There's no way around that. But I don't pay it into the state of Colorado because I am now in Wyoming. That's called exercising your ballot by foot. Thank you.
All right. Chris, response to Jack.
You know, I think that one of the things that's worth noting about this proposal is it will ultimately be up to the voters of the state to decide if they want to say yes or no. So we're doing what Tabor says you must do. If we believe there's a need for a tax increase on the wealthiest people in Colorado, we put the question to the voters. We're going to have to get 125,000 petition signatures, including 2% of the registered voters in every state Senate district in Colorado. And we're going to have to get a majority of the people of the state to vote yes. So that's the first thing to say about it. The second thing is, I think Wyoming is a very lucky state because of the mineral resources they have. Their severance taxes bring in considerably more revenue than Colorado does. States like that, you look at Alaska, their permanent fund that they get from their oil and gas and perhaps other fossil fuel extraction pays for the bulk of the services that they provide to the people of their state. So that's wonderful and good for them. And that is not the kind of wealth of minerals we have in Colorado. We certainly do have a thriving fossil fuel industry in many ways, but the rates are lower and the volume is much lower of what we bring in.
Jack, appreciate the call. Jack's line is open, 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971, or text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line at 720-819-5115. Troy, Denver, good morning. You're on with Jeff and Bill and Chris deGruy Kennedy of the Bell Policy Center.
Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, Chris. Just a question. Given that the Bell Policy Center is a political organization that uses a tax-exempt status meant for charity to avoid paying taxes, the Bell Policy Center in 2023 made $1.3 billion worth of revenue over expenses. How does Chris reconcile asking others who are contributing to the economy to do more when the organization he leads does nothing? Thank you.
Appreciate the question. I think that the way I have looked at this is, we are a tax-exempt nonprofit association or nonprofit organization, just like many others, including our friends over at Advance Colorado. The reality is it's kind of the same as a pass-through corporation, right? So we're not a C Corp. So just like a small business that's a partnership or a pass-through, there's no corporate tax paid. But almost all of the dollars that we raise for the Bell Policy Center's budget goes back into employees, and they all pay taxes on their income, just the same as anyone else in Colorado. So I really think that this question kind of misses the point. We are like many organizations, both conservative and progressive, that are tax exempt, but that all the employees pay the taxes just like a pass-through business does.
All right, we'll continue with the phone calls. Joe Arvada. Good morning, Joe. You're on with Jeff and Bill and Chris deGruy Kennedy of the Bell Policy Center.
Good morning, Chris, Jeff, Billy. I looked out my window. I saw the ghost of Ronald Reagan. The 9 scariest words you'll ever hear. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. That is exactly what Professor Chris... I'm sorry, it's not Professor, is it?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
He is the president. He's the president of the Bell Policy Center, though. Yeah.
Right. And I do like the loophole you guys got to get your earnings. I just like ARC. Anyway, just saying. But the point is that the government, their basic function is to provide roads and bridges, safety, and schools, good public schools. Really, that is where the heart of government should be at, because that's what we want here in Colorado. We want good roads, we want good schools, and we want good safety. We want public safety. So Joe, let me ask you this. My question is this. How are you doing on those 3 basic things first? How are you doing?
Do I have a limited time, Jeff, to answer before you go to commercial?
No, please.
Okay.
We got a few minutes. Go ahead.
So I appreciate the question, Joe. I think, it may be the case that we have some different beliefs about this, but I will answer your question about roads, public safety, and education systems. One of the things that everyone needs to understand about roads is when Tabor passed in 1992, it locked in place the 22-cent a gallon gas tax. It has not grown in 33 years, and you better believe that the costs of building transportation infrastructure have grown a bunch since that time. Now, in the legislature in 2021, there was a piece of legislation passed that put in place some new fees to try to make up for the money that we were not getting from the gas tax to pay for our road and bridge repairs. And frankly, it just wasn't enough. I mean, we still have not caught up to where we would have been had that 22 cents a gallon grown with the economy over that year. So I would agree, we're not doing a great job with roads and bridges and transit infrastructure in Colorado. And I would say that that has a lot to do with us having starved the revenue that used to pay for it because of the passage of Tabor. When it comes to education, let's remember that we slashed property taxes last year. There were 4 years in a row. Now, it's a more complicated story. I got very involved in property tax policies over the years because it's a balancing act, right? When we got rid of the Gallagher Amendment, and then in 2023, we had this massive reassessment that had everything to do with the growth of people coming into Denver Metro. More people moving to Colorado put a fundamental imbalance of supply and demand into the housing market, driving up costs. That drove up how much people had to pay in property taxes. We came back around and cut it. We didn't cut it to where it was before, to be clear. We did allow some of that to stay in our school system. And what that allowed us to do is pay off the so-called BS factor for a K-12 education, where our state was out of compliance with the state constitution for 14 years on how much we were supposed to be paying for K-12 education. 14 years of being out of compliance with a constitutional requirement for how much we're supposed to be spending on K-12 education. So that is the reason that we're still not paying teachers what they need to teach in the community or to live in the communities where they teach, why our class sizes are larger, why we have capital construction issues with our schools. And what I'll say about public safety is this. This is fundamentally a local government issue. Local governments, counties and cities, that's who pays for police forces. That's who pays for county sheriffs. The state's role in public safety is very different. And so we have the state patrol. They have their part to play, and I think that they get the funding that they need for state patrol to do their job. And then we have a public safety division that does a lot of crime statistics and data analysis and work like that. So I would say, yeah, there's some work to be done on continuing the work on making our communities safer. But I would say that that's fundamentally not what the state government has done in Colorado, because this is a local concern.
That's Chris deGruy Kennedy. He's the president of the Bell Policy Center. They're leading an initiative to get rid of the flat tax, move to a graduated income tax. We'll continue our conversation. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. Honored to have in studio because this is what we want the show to be, the place where those conversations, the debates that affect the community take place. It's why we are Denver's top talk radio show. Right, left, center, get to come here. And Chris deGruy Kennedy, president of Bell Policy Center, willing to come in studio, having the conversation face to face. I really appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, this is cool.
By the way, you can follow him on X at deGruy Kennedy, and that's spelled CDEGRUY Kennedy. Look up Chris deGruy Kennedy on X. You can follow him there, or go to bellpolicy.org, bellpolicy.org, to learn more about his organization. Let's go back to the phone lines. Jay, Highlands Ranch. Jay, you're on with Jeff and Bill.
Hey, Chris, thanks for coming on. Number one, let me start with this. You know more about the details of state government, and you've forgotten more than I'll ever know on listening to you today. But the words and context matter, Chris, and the reason I called in is you use the statement, we just want to make sure people are paying their fair share. And the reality is government costs money to run. And before I die, I'd like to know if government inaction is 2 words or if it's 3 words. And the reality is that Tabor has created challenges for the financing of government. And the word fair means impartiality with no regard for self-interest.
And we've got about a minute, so I'm going to jump right to it. Define fair share from your perspective, Chris deGruy Kennedy.
I think it's impossible to define fair in an objective way. I think what we looked to do was try to get a sense of what the needs are of the state and who are the folks that are benefiting most from the economic growth we've had right now. And for me, what this is fundamentally about is making it easier for hardworking Coloradans to get ahead. And so for me, a fair system is one where the wealthy are paying more because they can afford to, in a way that makes sure we have great schools, that we've got great hospitals all across Colorado, especially in the rural parts where they have a really hard time affording the health care that they need, and making sure we have child care support so that families can actually raise kids while continuing to be part of the workforce. That, for me, is a fair system.
All right. That's Chris deGruy Kennedy. He's leading a ballot initiative to get rid of Colorado's flat tax, move to a graduated income tax. If you want to learn more information about it, go to bellpolicy.org, bellpolicy.org, to learn more about his organization. Yesterday we had Advance Colorado on, and Christy Burton Brown, and they're working on their own initiative, it looks like. The battle will continue, but what we love here is that the conversation takes place on the Jeff and Bill Show.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Sure,
much.
appreciate it. We'll continue. We got a whole nother hour coming up, plus some cowboy poetry coming in your way. You're listening to the Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's talk leader, because ours just like that. You know who we are. We're 710 KNUS.